former candidate for the U.S. Senate, longtime radio talk show host, author, and conservative policy advocate.
Justices to the Supreme Court, the left has been in open panic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Who will be our president when January 20th rolls around? Most everyone is saying it's Biden, but Trump is not giving up the fight anytime soon. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio. As always, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. The nation continues to grind away effectively with two presidents, the one who will be there for at least another couple of months, and the one who's claimed victory in an election still being challenged in court. We'll sort out where things stand in the battle to close the deal on the election in time for the Electoral College to meet and vote on December 14th. Plus, we'll be joined by a trio of authors from LibertyNation.com, international correspondent Onar Am, on his article about the election, It May Be Clean, but Why Does It Look Dirty? Economics correspondent Andrew Moran on what a Biden economy would look like, and legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza on Trump's battle in the courts to prove election fraud.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We get things rolling with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. Biden and Trump. Trump and Biden. Who's who at this point? Trump is president. Joe Biden has been declared president-elect by all the major media, but Trump keeps fighting in courtrooms in multiple states. It all creates an almost surreal picture of the political hierarchy now. Charges of election fraud are the currency of the Trump campaign at this point, with much of the focus on Dominion voting systems used in more than half the states in the country. Investigative reporter John Solomon of JustTheNews.com went on Fox Business Network and said Dominion's political ties have made conservatives increasingly suspicious.
Dominion was a donor to the Clinton Foundation. It's tied to the Democratic establishment. It did hire as a lobbyist Nancy Pelosi's former top chief aide. We've contacted and canvassed tens of thousands of voters now. We've not found any evidence that computers change votes specifically, but Dominion's system was primed for people to understand how they could use it and calculate, hey, President Trump's up at 20,000 votes at 11 o'clock at night. Let's find 20,000 votes somewhere and run them through the system in the dark of night. That is a scenario that when we talk to voters, election observers, even some city election workers in Philadelphia and Detroit, that appears to be a realistic scenario.
And the woman who, along with Rudy Giuliani, is heading up the president's legal team, Sidney Powell, went a step further on Dominion with a remarkably bold claim.
It's massive criminal voter fraud writ large across at least 29 states. It could have been happening. Anytime a voting machine was connected to the internet, and we have evidence that many were, it was obviously happening. It's obvious from the algorithm and the statistics that our experts are tracking out for batches of votes and when the curves changed. And it's going to blow the mind of everyone in this country when we get it all together and can explain it with the affidavits and the experts that have come forward.
Sidney Powell and company will ultimately have to blow the minds of judges and juries if their hopes of overturning the reported results of this election can be realized. 3 states would have to flip for Trump to secure a second term. Meanwhile, the media and self-proclaimed President-elect Joe Biden held a press conference this week backed by his Office of President-elect signage, and repeated one of his most famous remarks from the campaign about the resurgent coronavirus.
We're going into a very dark winter. Things are going to get much tougher before they get easier. And that requires sparing no effort to fight COVID so that we can open our businesses safely, resume our lives, and put this pandemic behind us It's going to be difficult, but it can be done. And they all agreed. That means rallying the country behind a national strategy with robust public health measures like mandatory masking, widely available testing with rapid results, scaled up production of life-saving treatments and therapeutics, and safe, equitable, and free distribution of the vaccine.
Biden, of course, has one major advantage over Trump. We now have two separate vaccines reporting 95% success rates in final trials, thanks in large part to Trump's Operation Warp Speed. And the beleaguered president celebrated with a victory lap.
In the past 9 months, my administration has initiated the single greatest mobilization in U.S. history, pioneering, developing, and manufacturing therapies and vaccines in record time. Numbers like nobody's seen before. No medical breakthrough of this scope and magnitude has ever been achieved this rapidly, this quickly. Operation Warp Speed is unequaled and unrivaled anywhere in the world.
Current expectations are that the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines will be ready to roll by the end of the year. Frontline workers and old and medically compromised people will be first in line, with the hope that most of America can be vaccinated by next spring. Now, if Biden is ultimately proclaimed the president-elect when the Electoral College meets, he will face a Congress teetering on the edge, with Democrats losing at least 10 and maybe as many as a dozen seats in the House, and Republicans needing one win in the two Senate races in Georgia next month to maintain control of the Senate. Thus, Biden knows if he makes it to the White House, he'll have to be able to apply his supposed skill in working across the aisle.
Look, I am not a pessimist, as you know, and I think there are enough Republicans who've already spoken out, but I think there'll be many more, not many more, there'll be a larger number once the election is declared and I'm sworn in, to be able to get things done. I think they understand. For example, I can't imagine there not being a willingness on the part of Republicans. There's going to be significant pressure to deal with health care. I think we can get a lot done.
Boy, is this guy the opposite of Trump or what? But of course, Biden would never be on the precipice of becoming president if not for the man who saved his flagging career 12 years ago, Barack Obama. But you'll hardly believe what the 44th president said this week about the benefits of a post-Trump Biden presidency.
I think that what Joe and Kamala can do is to reestablish that we don't use the Justice Department, for example, to go after political enemies, that we don't mingle personal business interests with the business of government, that there's an expectation that the president doesn't routinely lie.
Wow, that may set a new land speed record for hypocrisy. Talk about rich. Obama says that unlike Trump, Biden won't use the Justice Department against his enemies, after his own Justice Department tried every trick in the book to dismantle the Trump candidacy in 2016 and then his presidency. And he said Biden won't mingle personal business interests with the interests of government, when we know for a fact from that laptop in the Delaware computer store that that was exactly what Biden's been doing for years, if not longer. And lies? How about saying he would ban fracking about a dozen times in the primary campaign and then claiming he never said it? Imagine if the media held Biden to even 1/10 of the standard to which they hold Trump. Finally, to put the election in perspective from a high-profile figure on the left known for his brutally frank analysis, here is Bill Maher, hardly celebrating Trump's defeat, instead laying waste to Democrats who were laid low in Congress.
Liberals can either write off half the country as irredeemable, or they can ask, what is it about a D next to a candidate's name that makes it so toxic. Pennsylvania Democrat Connor Lamb says Democratic rhetoric needs to be dialed back. It needs to be rooted in common sense. Thank you. Thank you. Republicans are the party of don't wear masks, kids in cages, lock her up, and Democrats are the party of every hypersensitive social justice warrior woke bullshit story in the news.
There you have it, a brief summation of the state of our two major political parties post-election 2020. Quick break, and then we'll return to consider a compelling question. This election may be clean, but why does it look dirty?
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, it may turn out that former Vice President Joe Biden wins the 2020 presidential election fair and square. However, the Democrats have behaved as if they are guilty. It could be a clean election, but it happens to look like it would if it were rigged. Those the words of LibertyNation.com international correspondent Onar Am in an article entitled, "It May Be Clean, but Why Does It Look So Dirty?" And Onar joins us now from his native Norway. Hello, Onar.
Hey there, Tim.
Good to have you back. So you write that Biden, the Democrats, and the legacy media have done everything in their power to label anyone who has worries about election integrity as conspiracy theorists and extremists who are trying to steal the election. Does this behavior prove the Democrats' guilt? Or does it just prove that anything but an immediate concession from the reviled 45th president is flat out unacceptable?
I think that if there was no indication of any voting problems, no issues with the election, then they would have been right to call this a conspiracy theory and so forth. But there's such obvious evidence of election problems and irregularities that they, when they simply dismiss it, it makes them look guilty.
Now, you also write, while disparaging the president for ignoring the experts, the Democrats chose to dismiss the same experts who said that voting in person was safe. There may have been an innocent reason for this, but it sure looks like they were preparing for massive fraud. How so?
Well, if there's actually no medical reasons for mail-in voting, then you have to ask, why did they push for it? I mean, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the face of the coronavirus expertise, he said that, well, if you can safely go to Walmart, you can also safely vote. Just be careful about mask usage and social distancing and hand hygiene, then it will be okay. And so they say, listen to the experts. That's what the Democrats keep on saying. Well, here's an expert, the foremost expert, who basically said mail-in voting is not necessary, but they still insisted on it. And then you have to ask why. The only rational explanation to that, if they're not concerned about health issues, is that it makes it easier to cheat. So it looks like they're setting it up so that they can hide massive voter or election fraud.
Now, you also write about shy Trump voters, saying that pollsters underestimated how many people lied about voting for Trump even more than in 2016, and that they needed to switch some 2.7 million votes to effect a Biden victory. So who were these shy Trump voters, and how do we know there were more than anticipated?
Well, let's first start with how we know that there were more than anticipated. In 2016, the polling companies conceded that there was a shy Trump vote that they weren't able to catch. And in this election, they adjusted for that. In other words, they had actually in the polls added on a certain percentage, which was supposed to compensate for the shy Trump vote. But on election day, when the exit polls were 5% off on average, roughly speaking. So how can you be 5% off, which is outside the error bars of the polls, unless there was a shy Trump vote that you weren't able to catch. So basically, we know for a fact that there was a shy Trump vote. And now we also know who they were, because now they're starting to tell us that the shy Trump vote was white, college-educated voters, Trump voters. They were the ones that were lying about voting for Trump, because they are in fields with other college-educated people. And it's in the universities that you have the most radicalized leftists. So if you are college educated and you work with other college educated Democrats, you're most likely to be surrounded by hateful people who want to destroy your life if you vote for Trump. If you're just an ordinary Trump supporter, you're probably living in a neighborhood with other people who think like yourself, and you're not so worried about it.
Before we let you go, I want to talk briefly about another piece, a compelling piece that you've written entitled, "What is Trumpism?" How do you define it? And can Trumpism last beyond his presidency?
I think that the president has actually defined in one sentence very simply what Trumpism is. It's America first. So if you only have one sentence to say it, that's it. But there's more to it than that. It is that he fights. Like when Donald Trump came on the scene in 2016, people said, "Oh, he's so rude," and the Trump supporters said, "Yes, but he fights." But he lies all the time. Yes, but he fights. But we can't trust him. Yes, but he fights. So people were so tired of spineless, backstabbing Republicans who told something when they were running for election, and the moment they got in office, they turned their back on their voters. Or if you just call them racist, they just give up immediately. Now, this is precisely the reason that people voted for him, that he's fighting. If this had been any other typical Republican, he would have said, "I concede." And that's precisely why they didn't want to. They don't want to vote for noble losers. And who can replace him? I mean, can it live on beyond that? It depends. If you have someone who just talks the talk, but they're not willing to fight, then Trump cannot be replaced. But if they show the willingness not to back down, that they're willing to fight, then there's a good chance that there can be life after Trump, so to speak.
Penetrating stuff as always. Onar Am, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
From Norway, Onar Am, international correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Stay right there, because we'll be back to discuss the economic impact of a prospective Joe Biden presidency.
Ready, set, go.
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com, because we put the power of the press in your hands. With one click, Liberty Nation delivers tomorrow's news.
And remember, liberty.
Today.
All the time and everywhere.
Liberty Nation connected the dots between a Chinese research biolab and a wet market where COVID-19 was supposedly discovered 2 months before the MSM. We were first to alert you of a serious attack on gun rights in Virginia. LN honed in on the Biden-Burisma scandal months before it hit the papers. We brought you exclusive interviews from the border.
We're looking at people just rising up.
Liberty Nation was on the ground in London,
Trump rally in front of the American embassy,
bringing you on-the-scene reports about Brexit. LN reported that COVID-19 was more virulent but less deadly weeks before others. LibertyNation.com delivers tomorrow's news today with LNTV's Liberty Nation Radio, the Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts, and dozens of insightful original articles and a new Roku channel. Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. LibertyNation.com.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
If President Trump was going to win the 2020 election, he would have needed to do it on the strength of an economy which was chugging along in fine shape until the coronavirus hit, and which has shown surprising strength in bouncing back from COVID-19's staggering economic consequences, though this third wave of the virus promises to pack a wallop. But according to what we've been told, 5 million more people have voted against Trump than for him, and his path to a second term is a long shot. So it looks like the voters might well receive what they voted for, a Joe Biden economy. And just what would that likely look like? Joining us to answer that question is the man on all things economic, fiscal, and incomprehensibly geekish, LibertyNation.com economics correspondent Andrew Moran. Welcome back, Andrew.
Thank you. As always, that's a great entrance for me.
I appreciate that. I take a while trying to put that together, but Andrew, what would be the most immediate impact on the economy of a Joe Biden presidency?
Well, I think that depends on who he's surrounding himself with. So far, he's surrounding himself a lot of Obama officials, and he's having a lot of people who support lockdowns. I remember just last week, one of his key COVID-19 advisors, he appeared on CNBC and he was talking about how the nation have to shut down for 6 to 8 weeks to contain it. Now he did tergiversate and he said that that wasn't a policy suggestion. But if he has these people with these ideas surrounding himself with, then if there's a dramatic spike come inauguration day, what would prevent Joe Biden from saying, okay, let's shut down the country and let's hurt these businesses even more? But I think if he's able to get a lot of the fiscal stimulus passed that he wants, and he wants to spend more, then I think the economy, will be fine in the short term. Because if you look at all the data and the way the markets are performing, they really need that stimulus, both monetary and fiscal. Without it, the trading wheels are just going to come off, and they're going to fall off the fiscal cliff.
Now, Trump was saying the stock market would collapse if Joe Biden was elected, but the markets held up well. What do you surmise in the reaction of markets to Biden's apparent victory?
Well, I don't think it's so much that the markets were cheering Joe Biden. I think they were cheering based on the fact that there's more certainty that Joe Biden is going to win. There isn't going to be this political chaos. We're not going to be fighting in the streets. Well, at least on a widespread scale. Because if there's one thing that markets don't like, it's uncertainty. If you're heading into November or December and there still isn't a clear winner, then you're going to have a major sell-off going on. And so they know what they're getting with Joe Biden. They just wanted to know, okay, fine, this is who we're getting, and that's it. I mean, it wouldn't have mattered if Biden or Trump won. The markets were still going to react. But it is interesting, however, because I've seen a lot where, at least on Twitter, when it comes to Biden supporters, and they would talk about, well, Trump warned that 401k would crash, as you just said. So the stock market, if you look at the stock market hasn't really soared on a Biden presidency. It didn't really soar that much on announcements that Pfizer and Moderna were producing a coronavirus vaccine. So the markets, you would expect that the markets would soar 2,000 points, over every single day with those vaccine announcements, but that doesn't happen. And that to me suggests how weak the economy is right now because of the coronavirus pandemic, and then all these businesses shutting down, retailers are closing, shoppers are staying home. Nothing's really going on. So you need even more stimulus from the Fed, from Congress, in order to keep the thing going on. I would say, however, to look at gold and silver markets. They can provide a good example or a good measurement of what could happen. There has been some sell-off going on in gold and silver, but it still remained at multi-year highs because everyone's expecting higher inflation coming on. Of course, it does depend on the makeup of the U.S. Senate, but for the most part, Biden will probably use executive action, and you'll have these trillions of dollars being spent and then trillions more being printed, and that's going to lead to massive rampant price inflation. I wrote a few months ago talking about the COVID-19 induced inflation going on, and you're starting to see a huge spike in it, at least when it comes to the key ones of food and shelter. Those are skyrocketing right now. The things that people want, things are going up. Things that people don't want, it's going down.
The worst possible combination. Now, Andrew, there will obviously be large tax increases proposed by Democrats in the White House and the House of Representatives. The Senate may block if it's controlled by Republicans, which is yet to be finally decided. What impact would reversing the Trump tax reform, the Trump tax cuts, be likely to have on a staggering or recovering or soon to be staggering again economy?
Well, one of the main reasons that Trumponomics was such a success and why the financial markets popped and why the economy grew at a remarkable pace was because of the tax cuts. At first, I was skeptical. I thought it was just reshuffling of the deck chairs and it wouldn't really too much growth. But good thing I was incorrect. And the tax cuts, if they benefit more than just corporations. 82% of Americans they benefit from the tax cuts. So if you reverse them or raise taxes at a time when nobody has any money, businesses are shut down, corporations are they're not expecting to grow their operations anytime soon, you're going to have a stagnating economy with rampant price inflation and an economic downturn. When it comes to small businesses, I mean, if Biden leaves them be, then perhaps they can recover. But there's always a trickle down effect when it comes to raising taxes on corporations because a lot of their customers are small businesses. So if you're going to raise taxes dramatically, or at least get rid of those Trump tax cuts, then you're not going to have much growth. So a Biden presidency will not lead to much. Won't lead to happy days are here again.
Well, there's taxes and then there's regulations. And in the grand scheme of things, Andrew, how important has Trump's deregulation been to the economy as opposed to tax cuts and tax reform?
Well, I think the deregulation was great for business, but I think it was even better for the consumer. Consumers have saved thousands of dollars thanks to this to the deregulation. I remember I wrote a few months ago, I think it was earlier this year, on Liberty Nation, talking about how much consumers have saved. If you look at the cost of an automobile, for instance, the average family has saved around $3,000 because of the deregulation when it comes to green energy or fuel efficiency or whatever. I think it was for every one new regulation, 3 were removed, but he went as far as going 8. So
right.
That led to greater benefits for consumers. And actually, I was researching a couple of weeks ago on this, and even the federal government saved money on deregulations because I think the average department saved around $18 billion in regulatory cost savings because they had less of slapping these fines on, investigating problems, having more manpower. So the deregulations benefited everybody except Trump's opponents because then this wouldn't lead to economic growth, and then they could be happy saying, economy's suffering, and Trump's evil, and Trump's Hitler, and all that stuff.
Well stated. Finally, Andrew, how big a challenge does COVID-19 now in a third wave continue to present to the economy?
Well, I think Penel Bird, who seems to be the COVID correspondent at Liberty Nation, he's written extensively on this, talking about how destructive it's been, how it's been more destructive, the response to it, than actually the virus has been to everybody, corporations, small businesses, households, everyone is suffering from it. The coronavirus vaccine, Pfizer said it's 95% effective. Moderna says it's 94% effective, but will it be that good? I mean, will people want to take it considering how new it is? If there has been that extensive research, are there going to be side effects? So a vaccine isn't the panacea that we all expect it to be. It's not going to erase the whole pandemic. You already see the Great Reset going on, and people like Dr. Fauci talking about you still have to wear masks. You still have to social distance even with these vaccines. So as long as these public health guidelines are implemented for the next couple of years, there's not going to be a tidal wave of economic growth happening, which is why the Fed keeps talking about both. You're going to need fiscal stimulus, and the Fed is going to be there to support both the economic downturn and the economic recovery. So you're going to have all this money spending and money printing for the next several years going on, which takes away from the private economy, which then leads to higher price inflation. And a bit of a teaser: I'm going to be writing an article in the coming days for Liberty Nation talking about how evil these policymakers are, because not only do they want higher price inflation, they're punishing people who are making less money because of these coronavirus measures that they support. So that's a spoiler for all of our Liberty Nation listeners right now.
Nobody does it better when it comes to economics than Andrew Moran of LibertyNation.com. Andrew, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
And you stay right there, because we'll return with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now it is time to welcome in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, the man who we fondly call our guardian of individual liberty for this segment called Talkin' Liberty. Welcome back, Scott Cosenza.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Tim.
Well, pleasure to have you as always. Let's start with a couple of the circuits on the federal court. First, the 10th Circuit asked to revive a case against an officer who, I guess, strayed into somebody's backyard.
Well, they didn't stray into the backyard. They purposely went there to enforce a sign ordinance. So a man had a sign posted out front, and the ordinance officer was going to cite him for it. Didn't want to approach the front door, claimed there was some obstruction, and heard noises around back, and went around and went into the man's backyard. And he sued. He said, this is an illegal trespass by the government into my yard. And you can say it makes a mountain out of a molehill, Tim, but I think it's a great case because it establishes an important point that government agents are not allowed to just walk on private property like it's cool for any reason they prefer. And one of the questions the judges asked, which I thought was a great line, if you were a trick-or-treater approaching the house, would you have gone to the front or the back as a bellwether? And they had to admit they would have gone to the front door. The question that the judge is reaching there is, would an ordinary person think to go around back? And in this instance, no. And so the trespass is likely complete. But we'll have to wait and see what the Circuit Court of Appeals says.
Okay, so let's move from the 10th Circuit to the 6th, where a professor has challenged a university pronoun policy.
Tim, I think that there's going to be a lot of cases in this area of the law, both as the language continues to be policed and transgender legal issues continue to perk up as they become more legally accepted in society and, of course, enjoy more legal rights. This case involves a college professor who called mistakenly a person as one sex and they identify as the other sex. And they basically told that person that they had to then call them the pronoun of the other sex. And the professor said that is an imposition on their First Amendment right. They didn't insist on calling them the quote unquote wrong pronoun or denigrating the student. They offered to use their given, their legal name, but they said that their own religious and free speech rights were implicated if they were forced to use a gender pronoun that they believed was inaccurate or incorrect.
This is what it's come to, huh? Suing people over the wrong pronoun.
When you first read the case, you think, oh, what a horrible ogre to not grant, this person who's struggling with their gender identity their due. But then you read into the facts, and that the professor tried to accommodate the wishes of the student within the confines of, their own religious whatever. And it seems like it was a case almost like the gay baker cases where they were designed not to get a cake, but to make hay about some person's religious beliefs, sincerely held religious beliefs. And that seems like that's the case here, but we'll see. Even if that is the case, Tim, in other words, they may be some imposition there, but the courts may still rule that it's within the bounds of the college's rights to impose on their employees free speech rights. Let's recall that while he has free speech rights, he is an employee of a university, and they have to be able to do their job. So we'll have to see.
What about if it's a public university as opposed to a private one? Does that change it?
Oh, 100%. It changes it. Yeah, it's from 0 to 100. The public university must honor the free speech rights of its employees and attendees, and the private university has no requirement to do so.
I think that's an important distinction that's lost on a lot of people. Okay, Scott, well, federal executions have been something of an issue in recent years. There weren't almost any of them for a long time, and then a few under the Trump presidency to date. Apparently, these executions are on track, but the D.C. Circuit has flagged some legal errors.
Well, that's right. Donald Trump has been aggressively executing federal prisoners compared to his recent predecessors. And in this case, they're doing so or planning to do so without a prescription for the medication. And of course, it kind of sounds absurd that you would need a prescription for medication that's designed not to medicate, but to kill. But that's one of the quivers or one of the arrows rather, in the quiver of the defense attorneys and people trying to keep these defendants alive and from being killed by the federal government.
Okay, Scott, let's move to something entirely different. The world of technology and Apple. Everybody knows them. They're preparing to pay $113 million, a mere drop in the bucket for the tech giant, in the so-called Batterygate settlement. What the heck is that?
Well, Tim, there's all that speculation that when the new phone comes out, the old phone that used to be the top of the line, all of a sudden just runs a lot slower. Well, guess what? It's not your imagination. It's real. They did it, and now they're paying for it.
Well, they shouldn't they? I mean, in other words, I buy a phone this year, or let's say I bought one in 2015, and it was working fine for a couple of years, and then the next version comes out, and suddenly mine doesn't work properly anymore. Isn't that pretty much what this is all about?
Some people might say that that's just justice for people who buy Apple products. I won't say it myself, but I've heard that online.
You won't say. The West Virginia Supreme Court has rejected anything goes traffic stops, which means what?
What it means is that they have changed the rule by which they were essentially allowing mistakes of the law to pass for valid stops. And so if in the case in question, the police officer saw somebody stumbling away from a car and basically caused that person to be arrested for a DUI. But they never saw that person operating a motor vehicle, which, of course, is one of the preconditions to that kind of a charge. And previously, under valid West Virginia precedent, that an honest mistake of the law would have been okay to overcome a challenge to the arrest. The court is no longer going to cotton those kinds of mistakes, and I don't think they ever should have, and they definitely shouldn't going forward. I think it's a great win for liberty. Tim, I've often been asked about open carry laws and talking about police often don't know how to react to that, and just the correct way for police officers to act is only enforce the laws that you understand. Certainly there are voluminous laws on the books, and we don't expect them to understand and know all of them. But we do expect and demand that they know the ones they plan on enforcing against the citizenry.
Well, no one can ever accuse Scott Cosenza of not bringing individual liberty down to the level where it applies to everybody. Traffic stops. Everybody is affected by that. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
Scott Cosenza, legal affairs editor at LibertyNation.com. This program, Liberty Nation Radio, and LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose with Mark Angelides, all available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.